Today we're going to talk about religion in the 1920s. Religion comes from the word re, which means again, and legion, which comes from the word legare, which means to read. In other words, if you put the words together, religion means to read again. Another interpretation of religion is that it comes from the word religare, which means to rely. Religion might have something to do with relying on God. Up until very recently, religion and science got along. Whatever religion said, science agreed with, and whatever science said, religion pretty much agreed with. And when we're talking about religion in this case, we're talking about Western religion, which is Christianity. Up until about the 1870s, religion and science got along very well together. It was during this time period that a man named Darwin came out with his theory of evolution. Darwin's theory of evolution says, rather than the world being created in 7 days, like it says in the Christian scriptures, over millions of years, species evolved to be what they are today. So there were basically two camps that arrived after Darwin's theory of evolution. The first group was the religious traditionalists. These people said, you know what? Science has to accommodate religion. You know what? If there is a conflict between science and religion, religion wins. So for instance, in their case, if they had to choose between evolution and creation, they would have chosen creation. Religious modernists, on the other hand, said that religion has to accommodate science. What that looks like, basically, is they still believe the world was, religious traditionalists still believe the world was created in 7 days by the Christian God, because that is what it says in the Christian scriptures in the book of Genesis. Religious modernists, on the other hand, began to think that evolution was the key to understanding the creation of the world. In other words, instead of just believing whatever the Christian scriptures said, religious modernists said we have to look at the evidence. We have to look at the evidence of the world. We have to look at science and not just religion to understand who we are and where we came from. And this was a radical shift from the religious traditionalism that had dominated much of Western civilization for the last 2,000 years, with very few dissenting voices. And the religious traditionalists basically came out into two categories. The first category was fundamentalists, or what became known as fundamentalism, and the second group was pentecostalism, or Pentecostals. The first group, fundamentalism, it's pronounced fundamentalism. Fundamental comes from the word foundation. When you're building a house, you have to have a strong foundation. In the same way, these Christians who became fundamentalists believe that there were certain things that made a good Christian religion, and they believed that every Christian needed to believe these things. So, in other words, in order to have a strong house, you have to have a strong foundation. So here's the house. The fundamentalists believed that they needed to have a strong foundation. And their foundation consisted of 5 points. The first point was that the Bible is literal. They believed that the Bible was literally true. Every word in the Bible was true. It happened historically in real time. It's not just stories from a long time ago. They believe that everything in the Bible actually happened. The second thing they believed was that the virgin birth of Mary actually happened. In other words, Mary actually was a virgin and conceived Jesus as a virgin. The third thing they believed was that Jesus Christ died as an atonement for sin. This one's kind of complicated. I don't want to get too much into it, but basically it means that they believe Jesus died on a cross, and because he died, Christians no longer have to go to hell. They believe now they are going to heaven. The fourth thing they believe is that Jesus Christ rose from the grave. The technical term for this in Christianity is called resurrection. It means to rise from the grave. And the fifth thing they believe is that Jesus will come again someday to save his followers. And this became known as a litmus test. A litmus test is a test to see if you are a Christian or not. Fundamentalists started asking people, well, do you believe the Bible is literal? And if someone said no, then they said, well, then you're not a Christian. And so this is the way that fundamentalists began to define Christianity. On the other end of things, there is Pentecostalism. Pentecostalism comes from the word Pentecost. Pentecost was a story from the Christian New Testament where Jesus' disciples were able to speak in languages they didn't know before and were able to convert people to Christianity as a result. So in other words, there was these people, maybe they could speak Hebrew, maybe they could speak Aramaic, but all of a sudden, with no training whatsoever, according to the story, they were able to speak Egyptian, they were able to speak all these different languages, and all these people were utterly amazed, and they said, oh my God, we need to convert to Christianity, no pun intended. Modern-day Pentecostals, especially in the 1920s, believed a few things. Just like we can sort of define fundamentalism by those 5 points, there were 3 sort of main points from Pentecostalism. Pentecostals, first of all, believe that we can speak in languages we do not know. Pentecostals call this speaking in tongues. It's kind of a complicated issue, and again, I don't want to get too much into all the specifics of it. You can go look it up yourself. But they believe that you could speak in tongues. You could speak in languages that you don't even know. Second, they believe that miracles or acts of God can still take place today. For instance, if you're sick, or if your mom's sick, or if you have a broken leg, or if you're crippled or whatever, they believe that if with prayer and certain other things that you can be healed, that miracles can happen, that people can be raised from the dead. Thirdly, during the 1920s, they preached that Catholics were the Antichrist. Antichrist was a derogatory term. They were basically dissing them, saying, you know what, Catholics, you're not Christians anymore. We've decided that you are not part of Christianity. And so this created kind of a rift between the Catholics and the Pentecostals. They really didn't like each other very much. So these two groups, the Pentecostals and the Fundamentalists, created a rift between religion and science. No longer did religion and science get along. This would eventually come to a head in something called the Scopes Trial. The Scopes Trial was a trial between evolutionists, those religious modernists who believed that evolution should be taught in schools, and religious fundamentalists, those who believed evolution should not be taught in schools. This is still a subject of debate in today's world. Some people think we should teach evolution in schools, and some people think that we shouldn't. Watch this clip to see Hollywood's take on what it might have been like to be at the Scopes Trial when it happened.
Your Honor, the defense has brought to Hillsborough at great expense and great inconvenience 6 noted scientists. Their testimony is basic to the defense of my client.
This fine-looking gentleman is named Clarence Darrow. He is representing John Scopes in the Scopes Trial. He is on the side of evolution. Let's hear what he has to say.
For I intend to show this court that what Bertram Cates spoke quietly one spring morning in the Hillsborough High School is no crime. It is incontrovertible as geometry to any enlightened community of minds.
In this community, Colonel Drummond, and in this sovereign state, exactly the opposite is the case. The language of the law is clear, Your Honor. We do not need experts to question the validity of a law that is already on the books.
Well, what do you need? A gallows to hang him from?
That remark is an insult to this entire community.
And this community is an insult to the world. Your Honor, I request permission to withdraw from this case.
Mr. Drummond, you can't quit now.
Why not? You were ready to 5 minutes ago.
Colonel Drummond, what reasons can you possibly have?
Well, there are 200 of them. And if that's not enough, there's one more. I think my client has already been found guilty.
Is Mr. Drummond saying that this expression of an honest emotion will in any way influence the court's impartial administration of the law?
I say that you cannot administer a wicked law impartially. You can only destroy, you can only punish. And I warn you that a wicked law like cholera destroys everyone it touches, its upholders as well as its defiers.
Colonel Drummond.
Can't you understand that if you take a law like evolution and you make it a crime to teach it in the public schools, tomorrow you can make it a crime to teach it in the private schools, and tomorrow you may make it a crime to read about it, and soon you may ban books and newspapers, and then you may turn Catholic against Protestant, and Protestant against Protestant, and try to foist your own religion upon the mind of man. If you can do one, you can do the other, because fanaticism and ignorance is forever busy and needs feeding. And soon, Your Honor, with banners flying and with drums beating, we'll be marching backward, through the glorious ages of that 16th century, when bigots burned the man who dared bring enlightenment and intelligence to the human mind.